Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very excited to be hosting today's talk on marine recreational information gathering habits and opinions on fisheries management and data collection. Our speakers today are Andrew Ropicki, Food and Resource Economics at Florida State University, an assistant professor and extension economist, and Stuart Carlton, Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, Purdue University assistant director. Our talk today is going to be providing results on NOAA Fisheries Mail Survey of Atlantic and Gulf States marine recreational anglers. Dr. Ropicki is an assistant professor in the Food and Resource Economics Department at the University of Florida, focused on marine resource economics. In addition, Dr. Ropicki is the Florida Sea Grant Marine Economics Extension Specialist and works with stakeholder groups on fisheries, aquaculture, and natural resource management issues. Dr. Carlton is Assistant Director of Illinois Indiana Sea Grant in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at Purdue University. Dr. Carlton's research focuses on the relationship between values, attitudes, trust, and behavior in complex environmental and natural resources systems. With that covered, I will give you a few logistics. We are taking questions. Please place those questions in the question or chat panel, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. If you are having any issues with audio or visual components of this presentation, try logging out of the GoToWebinar and logging back in. That should solve most issues. If you are still having issues, please know that this is being recorded. We will post this after the fact on our YouTube channel and on the library's seminar webpage. You will all also receive a follow-up email that includes a survey we would love for you to take and additional information on where to find this recording. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Dr. Ropicki.
Thank you so much. I coming through okay? Everyone can hear?
Yes, you sound good.
Okay, thank you. So jumping right in, this is some research that Stuart and I did for NOAA Fisheries, looking at marine recreational angler information gathering habits and their opinions, level of trust, beliefs, attitudes towards fisheries management and data collection. The reasons for the study were, well, first off, there was a 2017 review of the NOAA Fisheries Marine Recreational Information Program that indicated a need to improve two-way communication with marine recreational anglers due to variations in angler trust in the program. But beyond this is just a primary goal of NOAA Fisheries. Recreational anglers represent a key stakeholder group, and having good two-way communication is a big part of that. And that's really where our survey comes in. What we're trying to do here, what we were trying to do with this survey was to examine how recreational anglers gather information on marine recreational fishing issues. And then also learn, not just how they gather it and how much they trust those sources, what sources they use and how they trust them, but also kind of look at their attitudes, opinions, and beliefs towards fisheries management, with an idea that might help NOAA Fisheries not only know what information channels to use to improve this two-way communication, but what areas might need to be focused on to improve two-way communication and improve understanding and trust in what they do and what fishery managers in general do. The goals of the study, or the goals of the survey we're going over today, were to determine the sources these anglers are using to gather information on saltwater recreational fishing issues. Beyond that, we wanted to look at their trust level associated with these sources, because it's a good information pathway for NOAA Fisheries and other fishery managers to communicate with recreational anglers. Wouldn't just be one they use frequently, it'd be one they trust. So we wanted to look at the trust in the information on saltwater fisheries management and data collection issues from the different sources. We wanted to determine angler understanding of and confidence in saltwater recreational fisheries management, data collection, and data analysis. Once again, this is kind of once we know those pathways to use, kind of where does messaging need to be worked on? Where do you improve that two-way communication and trust and things of that nature? And then lastly, looking at angler opinions and beliefs regarding current saltwater recreational fisheries management and data collection. This research had two pieces, and we're going over the kind of big survey where we reached out to a lot of anglers and gathered a lot of data. But there's a second piece, and we're still hoping to do it. This one kind of gave us the broad overview of what's going on. The second piece was designed to do a social network analysis going into 3 fishing communities, coastal communities, where we'd have a much smaller sample. You're talking about maybe 60 anglers per community. But the interviews, as opposed to a survey, would allow us to get much finer detail on exactly how they communicate, how they share information, what do their social networks look like, things like that. So it was really a two-pronged approach. We're still hoping to do the second part, but unfortunately, COVID has made in-person interviewing, impossible. So for this presentation, we're focusing on our big survey effort. So in an effort not to kind of bury the lead here, I'll go over some of kind of the interesting findings we came across. And related to information sharing, what we found that was kind of interesting was that personal communications, kind of the face-to-face information sources, things like friends and family, bait and tackle shops, along with management agency information sources, being state and federal agency guides and websites, are kind of generally the more trusted and heavily relied upon information sources when recreational anglers want to gather information on saltwater recreational angling issues. We also found that kind of the less personal, the online sources, message boards and social media, both general and fishing specific, are less broadly used and trusted. But that second point does come with a bit of a caveat, in that those that use the most avid users of those sources, the ones using them most frequently, had a very high level of trust in them. So while as a general tool for increasing two-way communication, they might not be the best, there are certain subgroups that they might be able to, that fishery managers could target using those sources. With regards to opinions on management, some of the headlines, none of this is really earth-shattering, but it's worth seeing and actually getting the data to back it up. What we found was that anglers that feel they have a better understanding of how fisheries managers collect and use data have more trust in management, which seems pretty intuitive to me, at least. The idea that if you have an understanding of what someone's doing and a process that's going to affect you as an angler, knowing what they're doing and what their goal is and all that stuff should lead to more trust, and that's what we found. And that's kind of an important point in terms of increasing this two-way communication. Educational opportunities on what fishery managers are doing are an important option in terms of improving relations and trust. Anglers that have higher levels of trust in management are more likely to feel that current management is effective. Now, this isn't we're not saying we have causality here. What we're saying is these two are related, and it kind of makes sense. You'd feel that people that believe, hey, current management is working, are going to have higher levels of trust in management. So there's nothing really groundbreaking there, but it was one of the findings we had. A little bit about the survey. We mailed it out to 10,000 licensed saltwater recreational anglers. We targeted those between the ages of 16 and 99 years old. We had just over 2,900 responses to the survey. We included anglers licensed in for marine fishing, marine recreational fishing, in all Atlantic coastal states in Alabama and Mississippi. For the presentation today, we're going to kind of give you the broad overview of the entire sample, but the report, which is going to be made available, we did our analysis at the Regional Fishery Management Council level. So we have the Gulf of Mexico, Mid-Atlantic, New England, and South Atlantic. And with Florida, which you know is a member of both, the Atlantic coast is managed or is associated with the South Atlantic, and the Gulf is with the Gulf of Mexico. We divided our sample by county of residence. So those on the western half of the state and closer to the Gulf are associated with the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council. So looking at some of the survey results, we're really gonna, there's a lot of information in this report, and we're just gonna have time to touch on a few of these things. I will talk about fishing information sources, use and trust, knowledge and opinions on fisheries management and data collection, and then Stuart will cover some of the really neat findings related to shared values and trust in fisheries management. The full report will be available later today at countmyfish.noaa.gov. So if you want to look at just numerous tables and lots more data, have at it, because it's going to be in there for you. All right, so fishing information sources. So as I've already mentioned, we wanted to look at both source, use, and trust. And we asked two questions really to get at these, but they were tweaked just a little. They're a little different, and I kind of want to explain why. When we looked at source use, we asked about frequency of use. How often do you go to these sources for, and this is the key part, general saltwater recreational fishing matters. Things like fishing regulations, fishing techniques, hot spots, swapping stories about good fishing trips, things like that. And while the focus of our research is really that fisheries management and data collection information, we kind of went broader here because we just didn't know if a lot of anglers actually talk about these things. Do anglers worry about and discuss or think about fisheries management and data collection information? Is there a large group that would just, if we focused in on that for source use, say, I don't really think about these issues. My only concern with management is making sure I'm not breaking the rules. So we figured that, general saltwater recreational fishing information pathways would be the ones that fishery managers could use to communicate with anglers if they wanted to bring people into the conversation. Those that aren't, currently thinking about these issues, but you want to be able to communicate with them on these things, well, this would be the way to do it. When we got to our trust question, we went more specific because for trust, we really wanted to know, thinking about saltwater fisheries management and data collection information and issues. So we asked specifically about that, and they were given the option to say, I don't use it for that type of information. I don't use this source for that type of information. So that was a possibility. The information sources evaluated, you can see we had a number. They fall into some broad categories. The first I'd say would be things, your personal communication, your kind of face-to-face categories, things like family members, friends, fishing guides and captains, and bait and tackle shops, going down there and just talking to employees and fellow shoppers and things like that. And then we have maybe what you might consider traditional media sources, things like newspapers and fishing magazines and fishing TV and radio shows. Then we've got kind of the management, fishery managers themselves, or the government organizations, things like federal agency fishing websites and guides, and state agency websites and guides. And then kind of the organizational information sources, things like rec fishing organizations and environmental advocacy groups. And then lastly, you kind of have your online sources, fishing websites and blogs, online fishing message boards, and social media, both fishing specific and general. So looking at information source use. So these are our results, and I apologize. I know there's a lot on there, but I wanted you to be able to compare the source use for all of those categories, options we gave them. What you're looking at with these stacked bars are the percentage of respondents for each information source that, the dark blue bar is those that said they frequently use that source, and the green bar is sometimes, and you can see rarely and never. So basically, when you look at this, if you see a source with a long blue and green bar, that's a frequently used source, and we've ordered them based on the frequency, or I'm sorry, the frequently category. And what you see is what I kind of touched on earlier, is that friends and family members and bait and tackle shops scored really high in terms of usage. State agency fishing websites and guides, and federal agency fishing websites and guides. Those were kind of our most used sources. When we turn our attention to information source trust levels, it's a very similar thing here with the stacked bars. It goes from dark blue being complete trust. This one we have a neutral category. The yellow is neither trust nor distrust. And same basic idea. Trust level, high trust is the ones with large blue or green bars. And we see that the state and federal agency fishing websites and guides score really high, followed by kind of those personal face-to-face communications, family members, fishing guides and captains and friends. And I think that the high scores related to those personal communications really points to what we think we could learn if we do get to do the social network analysis. I think there's a lot to learn based on how they're communicating at that much finer community level scale. So looking at fisheries management and data collection, some of our question topics, the ones I'm going to cover, we asked about knowledge of fisheries management and data collection processes, and opinions on current management regulations. And the way we did these were, we gave them a statement and then asked for their level of agreement. So for knowledge of fisheries management and data collection, and it's kind of key to point out here that we didn't give them a test or anything. This is self-reported knowledge. But what we find is kind of interesting. So we asked, I understand how fishery managers use saltwater recreational fishing catch and effort data to set rules and regulations. And then I understand how fishery managers collect data on saltwater recreational fishing catch and effort. And what's pretty surprising, what's interesting here is a lot more people agreed with the first statement than the second. There were a lot of people, about half, or actually half exactly, that said they either strongly or somewhat agreed that they know how the data is used. But what's interesting is there's a lot less agreement on how the data is collected. They don't really have as strong a feel for that. And we talked about this idea that we found that knowledge, self-reported knowledge of what the fishery managers do led to higher levels of trust. Well, this is one of those opportunities for fishery managers to increase the knowledge. If they can connect, use these information pathways, and connect with recreational fishers and say, look, this is how we collect the data. This is why we do our creel surveys and our phone interviews, and what type of data we're collecting and how we use it. It has a possibility of increasing that knowledge and hopefully increasing trust levels. And then with regards to opinions on management regulations, similarly here, we gave them a series of statements and asked how strongly they agree with them. And I won't read through them. I think you can see them there, the 5 statements we gave. But one thing worth pointing out is that the overwhelmingly, it was positive feedback. For every question, over half of respondents, or for every statement, over half of respondents either strongly or somewhat agree. What's kind of interesting here is that there's a little bit of a dichotomy there. The statements that are related to, goals of fishery management, protecting marine environments and biodiversity, making certain that there will be good fishing opportunities for future generations, and providing good opportunities to catch fish and protect fish populations, all did much better than maybe the kind of nuts and bolts issues, the how the sausage is made. You know, are they well enforced? Well, that still scored well, but not as well, or easy to understand and follow. So it's kind of, they generally agree that objectives are being met. It's the implementation that maybe could use a little work. With that, I will turn it over to Stuart, who's going to talk about shared values and trust in management.
Great, thank you, Andrew. I will try to successfully share my screen as well using screen sharing technology. I'm going to show PowerPoint. And let's see. We should be good to go. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint?
Right now, Stuart, we are seeing your video and a blank white screen. I believe this happened last time.
Okay, yes, and I'm going to review my notes and use my notes to successfully navigate to the PowerPoint. Just give me one moment. Anyway, so while I'm doing that, I will fill time. I'm really gratified to see some of the attendees, and I'm gratified to start this again, be back in the fisheries realm, because this is actually where I got my start. My master's degree was in fisheries biology, and I worked for Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission for a while as a marine fisheries biologist. And so I am super excited to get back in this field. And I see some of my former colleagues there. Now, I just did the fix that worked last time. Did it work this time?
It did.
Look at that, as if by magic. I will start my timer too, so we don't go over. Good, so thank you for giving me a minute to talk about this. We're gonna talk about shared trust and values within, shared values and trust in management here. And so first thing I like to do is sort of go back and say, why do we want to talk about values? You know, a lot of times when I'm giving talks like this, I'm giving them to resource managers or giving them to people who are really interested in the science side of things, and I'm interested in the science side of things as well. So I'm happy to do that. But talking about values is important because fishing is a really meaningful thing to people, right? There's a lot of different reasons you might fish. This is a picture of my younger brother when he had more hair and less sense. And he's, some people, it's like me against nature. Here he is catching a snook, right? Or some people do it, maybe it's the love of nature. That might be a reason that you fish, right? Or maybe it could be, this is actually my bachelor party in Longboat Key, Florida. That's actually on the Sarasota side. But anyway, me and my family there, maybe you fish to connect with your family or for any of a bunch of other reasons. The point is that fishing is a really meaningful thing to people for a lot of reasons and a really salient thing for a lot of reasons. And so shared values are important. You know, people want to know that their values are being respected. And you're going to see me skipping some slides just to make sure that we hit the time right. Shared values are an important predictor of trust in management. So if we're talking about fisheries management and we want to know why do people trust management actions, shared values are an important part of that, or this perception of shared values. And trust in management is an important predictor of support for management actions. And we've seen this in fisheries and some other work that Andrew and I have done. We've seen this, in fire management, you'll see it in health, just across the board. This idea of sharing values and trust in management is an important component of support. And particularly in high profile and controversial management systems, which some, not all, but some fisheries certainly are. So why do we talk about values? Because values matter, right? And trust matters too. And so it's important to try to get a handle on these. And that's why this project is such an important and special opportunity. And so we have 3 research questions. We're fishing for answers today. 3 research questions that I'm going to harp on. Probably, well, maybe 3 if we have time. Do anglers believe they share values with fishery managers, right? That's an important question. So we're talking about how important shared values are. Well, do anglers feel like they have them? Number 2, do anglers trust fishery managers? That's a pretty important question too, right? And a third, more technical, we may not get to it, but are values and trust related to each other? Sort of, is the theory, does that theory that they are hold here? Research question 1, do anglers believe that they share values with fishery managers? And so to do this, well, first we have to ask ourselves, well, how can you measure values? That's a really hard thing to do. And values can mean a lot of different things. And so one way to measure values is to philosophize for many years, and you might come to some sort of conclusion about that. I, however, have 3 kids and no time to philosophize. So I'm going instead to the literature. And in the literature, what we find is this metric called salient value similarity. And that is one of several different ways to measure this, but one that I think is really handy in this context. So let's break down what that means. I'm going to be a little vague at first because it is a little vague, but then we'll get more specific. Values. Here, it's deeply held key beliefs and low-level understandings about something. So that is what a value is. And again, this will become clear, but we're not interested in all values. We're only interested here in salient values. You know, we don't want to know about your manager's values about, I don't know, tennis competitions, right? Or chess, or, you know, what they should eat. It has to be relevant to the system at hand. So we want, you know, it's values about the fishery and similarity. You know, is it something that matches? Is it something that aligns? And so a rough definition of salient value similarity is whether or not people perceive that someone else shares their understanding and beliefs about a specific situation. Now that's a bunch of gobbledygook, right? So let's move it instead. So I'll just show you the questions we asked, and I think then it'll make more sense. So we asked 5 questions about this, a 5-item index. And so we asked folks on a scale of 1 to 5, from strongly disagree to strongly agree, please evaluate the following statements. So with respect to saltwater fisheries management, now note we didn't split out state and federal here. That was on purpose because we thought it would be confusing. But with respect to saltwater fisheries management, I feel that fisheries managers share similar values to me. All right, that's one item. Share similar opinions to me is another item. Think in a similar way to me. Take similar actions as I would. Share similar goals to me. And those are the 5 that we asked. And so here they are. It's similar values, similar opinions, think in a similar way, take similar actions, share similar goals. So the idea again is, do we share a set of conceptions and beliefs about fisheries management? That's what we want to know. And this is the way that we're asking it. And so I'm going to show you a few graphs. First, I'm going to show you overall, and then we'll look at a couple of demographics. And so let's go through this graph bit by bit to make sure we understand what it means.
Stuart, can I ask
Yes.
you really quickly to move your mouse out of the off the
Oh, where
screen?
is my mouse? I don't even see it on the screen. Sure. Is it off
There
now?
you go. Yes,
Oh,
it is.
so
Thank
you can see
you.
this. I can illustrate with my mouse.
Yes,
Like if I
yes,
wanted
you
to,
can.
prepare for some mouseful illustrations, but they will be intentional rather than accidental. I apologize. Okay, so if you look at my mouse here on the y-axis, we have the individual items, right? The similar values, similar goals, similar opinions, act similar, think similar, and then I'll get to these bottom 2 in a moment. And then on the x-axis here, we have the average score. Now, I don't show the entire 5-point scale because that would shrink it down. We have it blown up here. 3.0 is the neutral point, okay? This is neutral. 4.0, which is not pictured here, we have is somewhat agree. So what we show here is that across similar values, similar goals, similar opinions, act similar, and think similar, we find some what I would call moderate agreement. This is good news, right? Overall, anglers moderately agree. And then if you look at these bottom 2, we added these on. I feel that saltwater fisheries managers listen to my concerns and respond to my concerns. And we're calling that our responsiveness measures, which we may come back to at the end. But again, overall, there's it's positive opinion toward this. So that's good, right? It's not strongly agree, but it's not disagreement either. And so I feel like this shows that there is some perception of salient value similarity within the fisheries management, within saltwater fisheries management. So let's look at a couple of different demographics just to see how it varies. And the big picture is it doesn't vary a whole lot. So as you're looking at these, I want you to recognize that when you see, there's a couple areas where you see some variations, but there's not a ton. So these, even though I said I wouldn't have animated ones, these should animate for you. Let me know if they do. And so you'll see that in the light gray, as they shift through different demographics, you'll notice the light gray is the overall, and then you'll see how it varies. So here is the overall right here, which you've already seen. And the next is going to show female. And you see there's, it's kind of mixed in terms of, there's a little bit of change, but it's a little bit higher in one area, a little bit lower in the other, and same with male, but really nothing's moving that much. And those black bars, I forgot to mention, are 95% confidence intervals. So really wide black bars means we're a little bit less confident. Really narrow black bars mean we're really more confident. It's really just a function of sample size. So here you can infer, if you want, that we spoke with or interviewed or surveyed, I suppose, more males than females, which is why the female confidence intervals are bigger. But there's not really a consistent, significant change here. And here's just the graphs displayed if you wanted to look at them, but for time's sake, I won't go into those. Let me make sure my mouse is out of the way. Okay. Then we looked at race also, and so we just used the census race categorizations here is what we decided to go with because that's been well used. And so it's going to be another animation. Here's overall, and then you'll notice with white people who responded they were white, there's actually a little bit lower similarity, a little bit higher with people identified as Hispanic or Latino, and a little bit lower across most axes with people who said that they were Black. And then it kind of goes from there. But again, not huge differences. And the ones where you see huge differences, like Pacific Islanders, the confidence intervals are so big that I don't have a lot of confidence about what we can say about those specific people because we didn't have a lot of responses. And you could try to weight them, but that would be that would introduce some statistical problems that we didn't want to do when it came to weighting this particular response. And so again, it's not huge differences. These are small differences. And overall, it is a slight positive response. And there they all are together. And again, you see those really large confidence intervals on Hawaiian natives and Pacific Islanders. And so that gives you a rough idea of the characteristics of our response set. This one I thought was interesting, by public meeting attendance. So, you have a lot of fisheries meetings, right? And so we asked about that. Do you go to a meeting? Have you contacted fisheries managers to discuss an issue? And this is the one area where we notice a pretty notable difference. So meeting attendees are way lower, not necessarily always outside of the confidence interval lower, but way lower than non-attendees here. So there's your overall. Next is going to be meeting attendees. And then it's lower on every count. And then non-attendees. And so the people who attend fisheries meetings perceive less value similarity than do people who do not attend meetings. There's no comment on causality here. It's possible that they attend the meetings and realize they don't share values, or it's possible that they attend meetings because they don't share values and they want to be heard. The literature and my prior research might suggest the latter, but our data can't actually speak to that. And so there is that. So then the second question is, do anglers trust fishery managers? And I put a picture of a bridge here because I was speaking with LaDon Swan, who's the director of Mississippi, Alabama Sea Grant. And he said the part of our job at Sea Grant, and I think fisheries managers, I'm not prescribing, but this is a good quote. It's like you have to build a bridge of trust that will support the weight of truth. And I think about that a lot. And so our fisheries managers trusted. Do anglers trust fisheries managers? I think that is an important question that is worth addressing. But the question is, how can you measure trust, right? What does that mean, trust? Trust can mean a lot of things, maybe as many things as values can, maybe a few fewer things, but it can still mean a lot of things. One way to do it is to go to a corporate retreat. But I don't recommend that because, again, I have 3 kids and not a lot of time, so I go to the literature instead. And so what we did was we asked a series of, I believe, 6 items. Again, the same 1 to 5 scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And so I trust fisheries managers to collect accurate data on landings and fishing effort, right? Do I trust them to collect accurate data? Do I trust them to accurately estimate total landings and fishing effort? Accurately measure the size of fish stocks? To what extent do you trust fisheries managers to use the best available data and science when proposing and implementing fisheries management rules and regulations? And I guess that one's so nice I included in there twice. To manage fisheries in a way that ensures healthy fish populations. Do you trust fisheries managers to do that? And do you trust fisheries managers to manage fisheries in a way that maximizes recreational fishing opportunities? Because again, we're asking this of recreational anglers. If we're asking folks on the commercial side, we might phrase that differently, right? So here they all are. Collecting accurate data, accurately estimating landings, accurately measuring the size of fish stocks, using the best available data, managing fisheries in a way that ensures healthy populations and maximizes fishing opportunities. Now, those last 2 are related, but they are not the same. So here's overall, again, the same deal. The 3.0 all the way on the left here is the neutral point. 4.0, which we get close to over here, is a slight agreement, or no, somewhat agree, excuse me. And then we have the different items up the y-axis on the left side of your screen. And so again, the same thing here. There is general trust in management. They display general trust in management, responded to that positively. Not strong, strongly agree, but on the positive side. And if you notice, there's kind of groups here, right? So collecting accurate data and using best available data and managing for healthy fish populations are kind of one group. Accurately measuring stocks, estimating the populations, and maximizing recreational fishing is kind of a second group. You might be able to argue, if you wanted to, that healthy fish populations is its own group. I won't dispute that if that's what you want to do. And so, but again, the story here is that there's a decent, there is positive levels of trust, which I think is important and worth remembering. And a lot of times in management systems, you don't see that, but here, this is what our data show us. And again, we looked at it by the same sort of covariates that we did before. So here's overall, and this is going to show females and then males. And this is measuring trust. So females have a higher level of trust kind of across the board. And males have a somewhat lower level trust across the board. And this is a little different than the salient value similarity results, but not notably different. Again, these are small differences, right? These are small differences, generally speaking. So the general story, again, hasn't changed. Okay, and there they are by gender. Trust by race, we looked at it by race. We thought that might be an important demographic because we want to see to what extent is the trust spread across the different racial identifications. And so here you notice the pretty significant increase in trust among Hispanic and Latino and among people identified as Black or African American. And then it's back towards the middle more with Asians. And then we get into the smaller groups like the Hawaiian natives and Pacific Islanders and other. And oh, I apologize, I didn't change that. It's American Indians and Alaska Natives is who that is. And there are people identified as other. But again, we're talking small differences, basically all within the positive levels of trust. This indicates that there is a moderate amount of trust in this system, which I think is interesting. And then let's look at it by meeting attendance, and this will mirror the results from salient value similarity. Meeting attendees have less trust, tend to respond less positively than non-attendees, and less positively, of course, in the overall group. And now our data doesn't say, and it'd be interesting to get some qualitative data to this point, but my gut feeling is that it doesn't say what causality is, but my gut unofficial opinion is that it's people are going to the meetings to try to develop trust rather than they're leaving the meetings with less trust, because that would not make a ton of sense. So then the final question, are values and trust related to each other? Do they go together like peanut butter and jelly or not? It's kind of the last question that we have. And so all we did to answer this is we took those two things before and we turned them into indices. I just averaged them. We did some tests to make sure you could average them, and you could. So I averaged the salient value similarity, and I averaged the management trust into two indices, and I actually averaged the perceived responsiveness too. So it's gonna be a little complicated, but I think we can do it. So you can see my mouse. So I'm gonna put a bunch of dots here. And what we're hoping for from a theoretical standpoint is to see that there is anytime you have a 5 in management trust index, you have something like a 5 in salient value similarity index, and hopefully that'll be a bright yellow, right, for perceived responsiveness. And so we're going to put up all those points, and then down here you would expect them to be closer to there. You're hoping to see, nobody sees a 1-to-1 relationship, but closer to a 1-to-1 relationship with the purples down here and the yellows up there. And then I'm going to put a blue line on top because I like blue lines, because then that's going to be a localized smooth regression line. And that's exactly what we see, right? This really sums it all up. So I jittered the points, which means I spread them out a little bit so you could see them. And everything in this upper right-hand corner, first of all, this is where most of the stuff is, right? Most of the trust and most of the salient values are high. Most of the perceived responsiveness are high. It's not across the board, but most of it is high. And this blue line is a smoothed, again, estimate of the relationship. I mean, that is pretty darn close to 1-to-1, which actually kind of surprised me how close to 1-to-1 it was. I didn't anticipate it being that good of a relationship, but it is. So, just as the theory would predict, when people perceive the shared values, they also tend to trust management, and they also tend to perceive that management is more responsive. Again, there's a lot of causality to tease out, but those relationships are there, and those associations are there. And that's really interesting and important to see, I think, within the context of saltwater recreational fisheries management. And it's an exciting result, and I do hope that we get to continue it on and explore some of this qualitatively, and more importantly, explore those communication pieces that Andrew was talking about. So if we know that values are important and we know the management trust is important, how can we use communication to try to meet in the middle there? So in conclusion, just to remind you what I told you, stakeholders show slight agreement that fishery managers share salient values. That's good. They say, hey, we have positive feelings towards this idea of shared values. And there's the graph that shows that. especially similar values and similar goals. And that's where the opinions may be different and acting similar, whatever. Values and trust. Generally, stakeholders trust saltwater recreational fisheries managers, some slightly more than others. Meeting attendees is where this is really notable, right? But generally speaking, there's a moderate or a slight level of trust. And then perceived salient value similarity is strongly positively associated with both trust and perceived responsiveness, which is what we hoped to see, and it is what we saw. And there's that graph as well. And so with that, I thank you for listening, and I am happy to take your questions, as is Andrew, I bet.
Great, thank you both so much. Okay, we have a few questions, and I'm sure people are furiously typing to get their questions in as well. I'm gonna start with our first one. How did avidity and age affect information source use and trust level?
Do you want to take that, Andrew?
Yeah, sure. Source use and trust level, avidity are more avid fishers. They generally use a lot more sources and they use them a lot more frequently than the average person. The avid fisherman was really, I think that's what they're asking about, the avidity with regards to actually fishing. Yeah, that one was, they tended to use a number of sources and use them very frequently. Age, as you might expect, we did see older respondents tended towards more traditional media sources, which was kind of interesting. You know, the newspapers and fishing magazines, TV and radio shows. And I think our younger respondents skewed towards social media and online message boards, things like that.
Great, thank you. Okay, speaking of social media, can you, Andrew, clarify what you mean by phishing social media? Does this refer to any type of social media that has phishing information on it, regardless of the organization or agency? Or is social media coming from a particular NGO or management agency that posts information about fishing or fisheries?
So we gave them some examples of, and I'm sorry, I forgot to cover this, and I'm gonna blank on all the names of phishing social media or phishing specific social media sites, and some of them were like Fishity, Fishbrain,
Go Free.
Go Free Hooked or something, I think.
Oh, that was one. Sorry, I don't use phishing social media. Yeah, Go Free Hooked.
Yeah. So we were talking about there are some social media sites that are phishing specific, and then we also, when we told them social media generally, it was more Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, things where, you know, more general social media options where there could be phishing content. Hope that clarifies some.
Great, thank you. Next question. What was the source of the participants in the survey?
You can take it, Andrew, because you have a better,
Okay.
you were much more involved in those nitty-gritty details.
Yeah. So it was basically, we drew a sample from licensed recreational anglers from the states mentioned, the Atlantic coast states, and Alabama and Mississippi. Louisiana and Texas are not included because they kind of do their own thing with regards to MRIP. But yeah, it was a sample drawn from the National Saltwater Angler Registry associated with those states we mentioned.
Great. And mentioning those regions, did you notice any geographic or regional differences in any of your findings?
I'll give kind of an overview, and Andrew will tell me where I was wrong. To me, the most notable thing was the lack of differences regionally. There are a couple areas where that's not the case, but broadly, the story to me is there's a lot of similarity. Now, we did notice, like on some of the trust and management stuff that I was talking about, in the South Atlantic, it tended to be a little more positive, whereas in the Gulf, it tended to be a little more negative. I don't know what's driving that, but we noticed that. But to me, So those are the two. Andrew, do you remember with the media use and things like that? My recollection is that it was really very similar.
Yeah, I mean, it was, we didn't add it in there. There were some slight differences, and I do remember the point about the South Atlantic being maybe a little more positive in their opinions and beliefs, and the trust and management stuff, and the salient values, just slightly so. I mean, it wasn't anything drastic, but yeah, there weren't, we were, honestly, I think we were expecting a little more regional variation than we got across groups. But you can take a look at the survey, and the report breaks down literally every question by management council region. So you can kind of see it there if you'd like to.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing I'd add to that is a lot of times there are small differences that you'll see, but I think sometimes you can get really hung up in small differences on a survey where you're talking about like a 4.2 instead of a 4.35 or something, and those are differences, and they may even be statistically significant at times, which is interesting, but it's not a huge practical real world difference. And as Andrew said, I expected to see a lot more than we did in terms of regional variations, given the all the differences among regions. Yeah.
And following up on that, did you have a relatively even number of respondents from each management region? If not, did any particular region have more responses than others?
Boy, I had a slide in, but I took it out for time. We didn't pull evenly from the 4 regions. Some were slightly oversampled. We did have some variation in response rates by region, but I should have the report in front of me. Nothing is jumping out at me right now. I'm not thinking of anything at this instance, but we talk extensively in the report up front about our sampling protocols and what constituted a response and a non-response, and we break down the response rate using certain industry standards and things like that.
Do you want to talk about the weighting a bit?
Yeah, so there is some weighting, and it is based off of well, it was based off of that pool. Do you remember, Stuart? Do you have the?
That is far outside of my expertise. Is getting that just right. That was you and the folks at NOAA and MRIP and ECS. But I guess with the weighting, what I would say is we analyzed the data. So we did do some weighting based on, it was based on management council region and one or two other things. But the thing that I noticed is we ran the analyses weighted and unweighted, and just like we were saying, I mean, it was barely a difference, generally speaking. If the questioner is asking, like, is there some regional effect that's in the data because of differential response or whatever, we didn't notice it, or I didn't notice it in any consistent or significant way.
Great, thank you. Do you have the number of overall participants in this survey handy?
Well, we mailed it to 10,000 licensed recreational anglers and got 2,924 responses. I'm just going to see really quickly if I can pull up what we got here. If there's another question we want to go to, I'll see if I can pull up the numbers.
Sure, we can circle back to that. Okay, next question. How reflective was the level of participants' race and ethnicity in the survey of the overall population in the coastal areas included in the survey?
That is a good question that I don't have the answer on handy. I don't know if Andrew does. If not, I'm happy to look into it if the person would like to contact me, because I think it's worth talking about.
Yeah, that's something I think we weren't really sure, because the INSAR data doesn't know. I mean, we were thinking about it more in terms of, was it representative of anglers, licensed anglers, and we really don't really know, because I don't think INSAR database has that. We didn't. There was no way to do a random sample that accounted for that.
Great. Okay, we can send that questionnaire on to you post-event. Okay, next question. Were there any interesting findings between a respondent's information source and their trust level?
Yeah, sure. I can talk to that. Stuart found some really neat stuff and I pulled it out due to time, but their trust level in sources was highly tied to the avidity, the amount they use that source. So the most avid consumers of information from a source were much, much higher in terms of their trust in information coming from that source than the average respondent. So those that said they frequently used a source, I mean, you might expect that, but I mean, why would you frequently use a source you don't trust? But the discrepancy was quite large. There was a trust gap that those most avid users of a source had extremely high trust in it. Stuart, do you have anything to add on that one?
No, I don't. And then the other, depending on yeah, I thought that was interesting, that sort of trust gap. And then if you're talking about trust and management in general, again, this is something we were really looking for. We thought, oh, are the people on these message boards, or whatever. And it just was nothing significant and consistent, generally speaking. And you can look in the report for all kind of tables and graphs related to that, but nothing interesting enough to make it to the top line webinar.
Great. Next question. Why were data for the second component of the study, shared values, presented as means rather than showing actual distributions of responses?
For the purpose of clarity, you can look at the actual distributions and that's fine. And that information I believe is in the report. If not, you can contact me and I'll get it to you. But for the way I present data, I find that presenting them as means with standard deviation, or excuse me, with confidence intervals is a better way to present the data. But distributions are available too, and that's okay. And there's when you look at Likert style survey data, it's perfectly okay to treat them that way. And it's been done, throughout the literature. But it's one way to do it versus another. But for me, I like to focus on the means and confidence intervals.
Great, thank you. Did you look at the difference between trust and shared values among anglers between state and federal management agencies, or was this just for fisheries management agencies in general?
We looked at that a lot. We went back and forth on that, and based on some pilot testing and a lot of phone calls and things, we decided it was too complicated to expect anglers to be able to make, every angler, right? We're not sending this just to the elite anglers who really follow this stuff closely, but every angler. We thought it'd be really hard for them to know, A, are you fishing in federal or state waters all the time? B, which management agency is responsible for which part of your angling experience? And overall, we decided that it was too complicated to do that. So we did not look at state versus federal. And again, that's something that would be interesting to look at from a science standpoint, but it's just not something we felt like we could get at here.
Yeah, and I just adding to that, on top of that, I mean, like Stuart said, we considered it and wanted to do it, but as he said, it would have been challenging for people to pull apart who was in charge of what. But even beyond that, we were worried about survey fatigue. We covered a lot of information in this survey, and breaking it out, you'd had to tick through 2 separate rows of boxes for the same question. We really didn't want the survey to stretch too long.
Great. Our next question, what would you suggest to make communication better? It would still seem to need some improvement.
Well, I think, this is a start in terms of, knowing where some of those trust and opinion gaps might be in terms of what do people think in regards to and knowledge of what NOAA Fisheries and the state agencies are doing versus what they're actually doing. I mean, I think one of the key takeaways, and like I said, it's nothing earth-shattering, but the idea that higher self-reported knowledge led to greater trust in management is important. I think it points to the idea of using these information pathways to try and inform recreational anglers on what these management agencies are doing and what the objective is, why you do it, with an idea that if they know, they might go, oh, okay, now I see, type stuff.
Got it. Okay. Was it looked at whether trust was affected, whether they participated in the APAS survey or not?
No. not, I guess, is the quick version of that.
Okay. Second question, is there a breakdown in the report showing relationships of sources of information and distrust? Reason how to best reach anglers who distrust the process?
Huh.
Well, I mean, we kind of go over, we do talk about what leads to distrust a little. And, honestly, I don't know if we go to specifically have tables that say, okay, among the people who had the highest levels of distrust, these are the sources they use. But that's a very good point. And I'm sure Stuart and I will go run to the data to look for that.
No, it is a really good question, right?
Yeah.
So we're saying that generally people have a slightly positive level of trust, right? But what about those who don't? Yeah, we didn't really do a ton of research into that with what we've done, but it's an interesting question. I'm scanning through as we speak the tables to see if I can comment on that, but we'll move on and I'll let you know.
Okay, we are reaching the close of our seminar, but I'm going to ask one last question and hopefully we can circle back to the earlier questions. At the end of the day, what would you say is the aha or so what messages that you would stress to anglers from this research?
Stress to anglers, was that what they said? Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's more for the management side. I mean, it's more the idea of what's important to the managers in terms of increasing communication with the stakeholder group. Boy.
But I think the messages about trust are important. It's important to repeat that stuff, right? Is that, there's a lot of heat around fisheries a lot of times because it is so high profile. But most people report that they have a moderately positive level of trust in management and perceive that managers share values when it comes to the fishery. I think that message is an important message because a lot of times, speaking again for myself based on past research, a lot of times you hear from the squeakiest wheels on any side of a controversy, and I understand why that is. But here we have a lot of data showing that, generally speaking, the people that answered our survey have a moderate level of positive feelings of trust and share values. I think that that's worth repeating to anglers because sometimes that message can get lost.
And I also think it does speak to, I mean, if there are anglers out there, and there are, our findings weren't universal, who feel that NOAA isn't responsive. I mean, we had those two salient value measures we added on responsiveness. I mean, just the fact that they did this research, this is an effort to improve communications with recreational anglers. So I think to an extent you can look at this research as an attempt to improve. They want to hear your voice. They want to interact with you and know what's going on.
Awesome. Well, with the last minute, where can everyone find this report?
Yeah, so that, as I understand it, it will be available at countmyfish.noaa.gov. Dave or anyone else want to make sure that's okay. I got that's right. So I think we're good.
Nice job.
Yeah.
And that'll be up there this afternoon. I think
someone put it in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah. And yep.
And for the person who asked about survey weightings and things like that, my contact information was available. I need to pull through the report a little more, but if you want to reach out to me and ask that directly, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, and talking about distrust and source uses, I looked at some graphs real quick, and it'd be complicated to tease that out because generally speaking, the more people used anything, the more likely they were to trust management. Probably because it means they're more engaged in the fishery, and we found that those people tend to trust. But anyway, it gets complicated quickly, so I'm not comfortable coming up with a quick answer right now.
Thanks. Andrew, did you find the number of respondents in your search?
So I mean, it's 2,924. Let me just pull the numbers. How did we sample? So response rate by region, There was some variation. So the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council region, we had about a 26% response rate. Our highest response rate was in the New England Fishery Management Council, about 33.75% responded. So they kind of bounced in between those ranges. Mid-Atlantic was at just over 30% response rate, and South Atlantic was at 27.6. Where we sent it, and this is the question they were asking with regards to how we determine the sample. I need to do a little more digging. 20% went to the New England Fishery Management Council region, 30% to the Mid-Atlantic, 25% to the South Atlantic, and 25% to the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council areas.
Great, thank you all. We are at time. If we did not answer your question, I will be passing those on to Andrew and Stuart offline to answer you via email. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Andrew. This was a wonderful presentation, and it was recorded, put up, and will be put up later on today or early tomorrow. Thank you all.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.